Hello and welcome to the OrCAD Capture series. This video is part 1, which demonstrates how to access the Preferences menu using the Options Preferences command. You can see across the top of the Preferences menu there are 7 tabs for doing things like assigning colors to objects in the design or perhaps setting up your grid display. Any changes in the Preferences menu are saved in a capture.ini file, automatically loaded when you start the Capture software. In addition, these preferences are workstation specific. If you copy a design from another person and open it up on your machine, your personal preferences will apply to that design. And any changes that you make to the Preferences menu applies immediately to the design. The Colors/Print tab is in the Preferences menu, and use this tab to assign default colors to various objects in the design. For example, a schematic symbol is a part body. You can see the blue color currently assigned to it. All of the pins are assigned to the black color, and signal names, known as aliases in the Capture design, are currently assigned to the color red. The schematic grid is presently assigned a gray color, which is hard to see. That checkbox to the left is a print checkbox, meaning you would turn that checkbox on if you want your schematic grid printed on the PDF. Assign a darker color to the schematic grid that is already on. You can't see it because of the color gray. Change the grid color and click OK. And you can see the schematic grid with the new color, which is much easier to see. And if you want to turn the grid on or off, you can use the View Grid to toggle the grid on or off. The next tab in the Preferences menu is called Grid Display, and you can use it to turn your grid on or off for the schematic or part or symbol editor and whether or not you want your grid to be dots or lines. The grid spacing 1/1 means a 100 mm grid as a pin-to-pin spacing. You have a 1 snap grid for every 100 mm increment, known as a pin-to-pin spacing. And now my parts and wires will snap to a 100 mm grid. Properties are also snapping to the 100 mm grid. And changing the divided into 2 snap grid units means 50 mm snap grid. Switching back to default is a value of 1/1. Once you've defined your snap grid spacing, you can turn the snap to grid functionality on or off. Another way to turn it on or off is to use the icon toolbar. When snap to the grid is off, parts and wires move on a very fine grid. When snap to a grid is on, parts and wires snap to a 100 mm grid. You can see it's also turned off in the Grid Display tab. So these two buttons here are connected and will influence each other. Now, let's go back into the Grid Display tab, and talk about coarse and fine grids. Coarse means the snap grid as you've defined it, and fine means off-grid or the ability to move objects off the snap grid. Connectivity elements are parts, wires, and drawing elements are other graphics, text, and properties. Setting connectivity elements to coarse means that all parts and wires must snap to the snap grid, regardless of whether the snap to grid is on or off. Setting drawing elements to master means these objects will snap to a grid only if snap to grid is turned on. Let's test snap grid settings now. The snap to grid is off and notice our parts and wires still snap to the coarse grid that we set up, so they are not dependent upon the snap to grid function. Notice the reference designator text is free to float off the snap grid. Now with snap to grid turned back on, notice that in addition to the text, the reference designator text is also snapping to the 100 mm grid. So the drawing element set to master makes those types of objects depend upon the snap to grid function. Let's look at the next tab now, called Pan and Zoom. And this is where you can set a zoom factor between 2 and 10, which controls how far in or out you zoom into the design using your zoom in or zoom out icon. You also have the I and the O keyboard shortcuts for zooming in and out. The next tab is our Select tab, which controls left mouse drag selection. The default setting is intersecting, which means any object that intersects the selection rectangle will be selected. If we change the setting to fully enclosed, we must fully enclose the object to be selected. We haven't fully enclosed that 2-input NAND gate, so it is not being selected until we fully enclose it with our selection rectangle. That's all the time we have now for this video. Thanks for watching.